It begins with a sound, a whisper that travels faster than a telegraph wire. It's a ghost story told in broad daylight, a rumor that takes root in the pit of your stomach. The whisper says the money isn't there, the paper in your wallet, the number in your ledger. It's a promise, and that promise is about to be broken. The year is 1907, and on the stone steps of the most powerful financial institutions in the world, a storm is gathering. It begins not with a crash, but with a cue. A handful of people at first, their faces tight with anxiety, clutching their bank books like prayer books. They aren't here to make a deposit. They are here for their money, not the paper, but the real thing. The cold, heavy, yellow metal that has been the bedrock of civilization for millennia. Gold. The line grows, from a dozen to 100. By noon, it snakes around the block, a human serpent strangling the life out of Wall Street. The whisper has become a roar. The Knickerbocker Trust, one of New York's largest banks, is teetering on the edge of a cliff. Its president had been caught in a risky stock market gamble, and the scheme had collapsed in spectacular fashion. The police arrive, not to disperse the crowd, but to keep them from tearing the bronze doors off their hinges. Inside, the tellers work with frantic precision, shoveling gold coins into canvas bags. The sound of it, a cascade of metal on metal, is the sound of a system bleeding out. This was the great vulnerability of the old world. A bank was just a building. Its strength wasn't in its marble columns or its steel vaults. Its strength was in your faith. And faith was a fragile thing. A bank only kept a fraction of its deposits in cash. The rest was loaned out, invested, put to work in the roaring engine of the American economy. But if everyone wanted their money back at the same time, the engine would seize. The Knickerbocker Trust didn't survive the day. Its doors slammed shut, trapping the fortunes of thousands inside. The panic was a contagion, leaping from one bank to the next. The Trust Company of America, then the Lincoln Trust. One by one, the dominoes began to fall. New York City was having a heart attack. There was no Federal Reserve, no FDIC insurance. There was only a loose coalition of powerful men who ran Wall Street like a private kingdom. And at the center of that kingdom sat one man, J.P. Morgan. From his library at 219 Madison Avenue, a room of red silk walls and Renaissance masterpieces, Morgan summoned the presidents of the city's banks. He was 70 years old, suffering from a severe cold, but his power was absolute. He locked them in. Literally. He turned the key in the heavy oak door and told them no one was leaving until they had a solution. All night, he worked, puffing on his colossal cigars, assessing the health of their institutions like a general reviewing his troops. He browbeat, cajoled, and threatened. He pooled their money, creating a multi-million-dollar rescue fund on the spot, and decided with the authority of a king which banks would live and which would die. And it worked. By dawn, a plan was in place. The panic subsided. J.P. Morgan had single-handedly saved the American economy. But as the dust settled, a terrifying question hung in the air. What happens when there is no J.P. Morgan to save us? That question went unanswered for 2 decades. America plunged into the roaring 20s, a dizzying decade of jazz and a stock market that only ever went up. The old fears were forgotten. Until Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. Black Tuesday, the day the music died. The stock market didn't just crash, it evaporated. Fortunes built over generations were wiped out between breakfast and lunch. But this was different from 1907. This was a systemic failure. As the months turned into years, factories shuttered their gates. Bread lines stretched for miles. A quarter of the country was out of work. And the people, their faith shattered, began to look at the banks. They remembered the stories. They started asking for their gold. It started small. The Bank of the United States, despite its official-sounding name, was just another private bank in New York City. In December 1930, a rumor began to circulate in the Bronx that the bank was failing. A single depositor went in and sold his shares. Then his neighbor did. Then the whole block. The next morning, a crowd of 20,000 people swarmed the bank's main branch. The bank paid out for hours, but it was no use. By the end of the day, it collapsed, taking with it the savings of over 400,000 people. It was the spark that lit the fuse. The panic of the 1930s was a slow, creeping horror. From 1930 to 1932, over 5,000 banks would fail. Each failure sent shockwaves through its community. Imagine your local bank, the one you trusted your entire life. One morning you walk downtown to see a simple, handwritten sign taped to the glass door. Closed. The money is just gone. By the winter of 1932, the country was in a death spiral. The bank runs were now a national phenomenon. People weren't just withdrawing cash. They were demanding gold. Gold was real. Gold was safe. As people pulled gold out of the banking system, the bank's reserves dwindled. To replenish them, the banks had to call in loans. But the farmers and businessmen they'd loaned money to were broke. So the banks foreclosed, which only made the depression worse, which in turn caused more people to panic and pull their gold out of the remaining banks. The system was eating itself alive. In Washington, President Herbert Hoover seemed paralyzed. The nation's gold supply, the very foundation of its currency, was draining away, shipped overseas by foreign investors. The dollar was on the brink of collapse. This was the apocalyptic landscape that greeted Franklin Delano Roosevelt when he took the oath of office on March 4, 1933. The banking system had ceased to exist. In his inaugural address, Roosevelt's voice, calm and confident, crackled over the radio. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. It was a direct assault on the psychology of the panic, but he knew words weren't enough. 2 days later, he declared a national bank holiday, closing every single bank in the entire country. The entire financial system was put into a medically induced coma. It was a breathtaking gamble. For 4 days, the nation held its breath. People resorted to barter, trading eggs for gasoline, dental work for firewood. During this eerie silence, Roosevelt's team drafted the Emergency Banking Act. They would divide the banks into 3 categories: healthy banks to be reopened, struggling ones to be reorganized, and hopeless cases to be closed for good. On the evening of Sunday, March 12th, Roosevelt sat down for his first fireside chat. He spoke like a trusted friend, explaining what a bank was and what his administration was doing to fix the crisis. He told the American people that when the banks reopened, it would be safer to keep their money in a reopened bank than under the mattress. He was asking for a leap of faith. The next morning, a miracle happened. The lines formed again, but this time, people were there to put their money back in. The immediate crisis was over. The patient had been stabilized, but the surgery wasn't finished. Roosevelt knew that to truly cure the disease, he had to go after its source: gold. As long as Americans had the right to demand gold for their paper dollars, the system would always be vulnerable to another panic. So Roosevelt and his advisors came to a radical conclusion. To save capitalism, they would have to break the promise. On April 5, 1933, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. The order forbade the hoarding of gold. It required every American citizen to deliver almost all of their gold to the Federal Reserve. In exchange, they received paper money at a rate of $20.67 per ounce. It wasn't a choice. It was a demand. Failure to comply was punishable by a hefty fine and up to 10 years in prison. The government that promised its currency was as good as gold now made it a federal crime to own that gold. It was a confiscation, plain and simple. The vast majority of Americans complied, believing it was their patriotic duty. With the nation's private gold now consolidated in government vaults, Roosevelt made his next move. In January 1934, he signed the Gold Reserve Act. The act immediately devalued the dollar. The government, which had just forced its citizens to sell it their gold for about $20 an ounce, now declared that gold was worth $35 an ounce. With a stroke of a pen, the government had increased the value of its own gold reserves by nearly 70%, giving it a massive windfall to fund the New Deal. The link between the American people and their gold was severed. The gold standard, as it had been known for centuries, was dead. And the Federal Reserve, created after the 1907 panic, was now at the absolute center of this new financial universe, untethered from the physical metal locked away in Fort Knox. The Great Depression gold run was a story of fear. The solution was a trade-off we still live with today. We were saved from bank runs, but in exchange, we gave the government and its central bank a level of power over our money that J.P. Morgan could have only dreamed of. The image of those desperate crowds has been replaced by the quiet glow of computer screens, where trillions of dollars, unchained from any physical reality, flash across the globe in an instant. The machine was rebuilt, stronger and more complex than ever. And at its heart is a new kind of vault, one not filled with gold, but with the full faith and credit of a system that decided in its darkest hour that the only way to save the promise was to break it. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more dives into the events that shaped our world.